Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Kelly Barner, and I'm going to be your host and moderator for today's conversation, which is all focused around three big trends driving supplier diversity programs in 2024. Now, before I tell you more about my two guests and we dig into today's topic, I just want to give you a little bit of background about our format, as well as a little bit of housekeeping in terms of how you can participate in today's conversation. So, as you will already see, there are no slides. You will see no slides today. This is a completely live conversation. You will have opportunities to participate. We're not going to save you for the 10 minutes at the end. I will be keeping an eye on the chat on the right-hand side of my screen. And as we go through the conversation, if anything comes up, I will absolutely bring those in and present either comments or questions to our guests. Now, in terms of today's topic, we're going to go through the three big trends, but all of this information comes from Supplier IO's 7th annual State of Supplier Diversity report. You will see that's actually pinned at the top of the chat if you'd like to get a copy of it for yourself. It's hot off the presses, so you can download that, and that will contain all of the insights as well as the specific data points that we're going to be talking through today. This is a huge effort they go through every year, and over 350 respondents provided the data that we're going to discuss in today's report. So without further ado, I want to bring my two guests on stage. I'm going to be joined today by Daniel Dorr as well as Laura Noonan from Supplier IO. So hi, Laura, and hi, Daniel. Thank you both so much for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thanks, Kelly.
Absolutely. Now, Daniel, I've got a big build-up here. We've talked about the report. It's the 7th annual, 350 people, but it's really the three big trends that everybody here today wants to hear more about. Can I have you set the stage for how we're going to spend the next half an hour or so by sharing what those three trends are?
Yeah, absolutely. So every year we look at how some trends are expanding or changing over time, and others are new trends. So this year, three big things that we're looking at and we're seeing. Number one was executive engagement is the first trend. The continuation is we're seeing more and more CEOs involved. The growing part of the trend is the changing part that business unit leaders are playing now with supplier diversity. Trend number two is around data. Data always been important, and how we manage it is really, really critical to programs. And the new trend is we're actually seeing more and more use of new metrics, and we're going to talk a little bit about those. And then growth. We're always looking for ways to grow our program. Some new trends in how people are growing their programs successfully using other tools like sustainability and geography as a way to grow their program. So those were kind of the three big buckets that we're going to spend the next few minutes delving into with you, Kelly, and everybody joining us here today.
So just for the sake of going in order, I love the structure that creates for us today. Let's start with this sort of top-down view and what we're seeing change. Laura, I'm going to come to you with the first question about this. So you've observed some things about executive. When we say executive, we're thinking CEO, board level involvement versus line of business. So that could be other functional leaders. It could be business owners. And in terms of how they're participating in supplier diversity, can you talk about the changes and trends that you've observed around that?
Absolutely, Kelly. So yeah, the report this year was so interesting in terms of this data, and it's really definitely seen some increases and shifts. So let me tell you a little bit about what the data showed us, and this is again from the State of Supplier Diversity report and from the responses that we received from many of you probably on the call today. So what we're seeing is more than half of supplier diversity leaders are now reporting results to the CEO, and so that's double from 2021. So we're seeing a huge increase in terms of executive level reporting. And that even we're seeing a huge increase with board members as well. So we're continuing to see that trend, and it's growing pretty rapidly. In addition, we're also seeing that 39% of supplier diversity leaders and professionals are reporting to their BU leaders. So and we'll talk more about this later, but they're really reporting that data and working with them in order to help, improve their overall supplier diversity numbers. And so we're seeing a big trend there. We're also seeing, as it relates to that 65% of supplier diversity leaders are actively engaging with business unit leaders. They're working with them on planning and a number of other activities. And so we're seeing this huge shift in the data and a real increase in reporting across executive and business level units.
And providing that information is so critical, right? Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is spread understanding, empower differentiated decision making. So I definitely hear from what you shared, Laura, that procurement, supplier diversity program leads are doing an excellent job summarizing, doing outreach, putting facts and data in front of executives and as well as decision makers. But I'm curious about this engagement piece, Daniel. So when we talk about engagement on the part of the CEO or the board or a line of business head, what does that engagement look like reflected back at procurement and supplier diversity?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Kelly. On the engagement with the executives, a lot of that we've seen more in terms of the amount of time. So, for example, some people used to do annual meetings or reviews with their board and their CEO. Now we're seeing it as much as quarterly, for example, and that's really around the data. But where it's expanded is around this business unit level conversations. And as Laura said, 39% reporting results to the business unit. So I want to be clear, this is not corporate results, right? You don't have to go tell your business unit leader, hey, the company is spending 3% with diverse suppliers. This is business unit level results. This is how much your department is spending with small and diverse suppliers and how that's laddering up to the corporate objectives. So that's the first part, is the numbers aren't the same. We're giving very clear direction and now doing business unit analytics. The second thing we also heard is that supplier diversity leaders are spending more time with their business unit counterparts. Once their program is up and running, they're spending more time with the business unit leaders, talking about upcoming contracts, talking about renewals, talking about business growth and what is happening with the business. We talked to E2O2, who runs the Logitech program, and he has a very clear model. He looks at his top 5 spenders, and he goes and sits down with them and asks them, what's going on with your business? How do small, diverse, local, innovative, scrappy suppliers do a better job of supporting your business? And they have a business conversation. He's very clear. I don't go and sell them supplier diversity. I don't go explain to them why supplier diversity is important. I go to listen to them and partner with them on how they can get better business results with small, diverse, local suppliers.
That's really interesting because it actually sounds entrepreneurial to me. It sounds like, you gave the example of Logitech. Anybody that ever starts any kind of small business thinks, I've invented the best new thing, but you still have to figure out how to put it in front of people, who to put it in front of, right? What's the right balance of talking to them to inform versus asking questions and listen what they say back to you. It sounds, Daniel, like there's been, I don't know, can we say an advance in maturity around how the person, whether a procurement professional or someone dedicated to supplier diversity, is having conversations with the business, that it's no longer explaining what is supplier diversity, why are we investing in supplier diversity? It's let's have a detailed conversation based on granular data, and let's figure out how we can support you or what you need and how we're going to make progress towards targets. Do you think it's fair to say that there's been sort of progression maturity-wise around how procurement engages with the business around this?
Absolutely. The other part of this, by the way, it also depends on the maturity of your organization. So if you're relatively early in your program with limited support, then you may not see this at the company level, but you might see it one-on-one with an individual business unit, who then becomes your executive stakeholder, becomes the person who really supports your program. But if you've been doing this for a while, if your program is flatlined, for example, or you're kind of just looking at numbers, this is absolutely where your program should be, and leading programs are moving to very, very quickly. And we've heard this for procurement. Procurement is going away. Of course, cost is still important to us, but we as procurement professionals are being asked to add value to the company. And supplier diversity is one of those areas where it's real easy to add value in terms of winning new business, driving innovation, and improving supply chain competitiveness.
Now, you've said the $1 million word, Daniel, and I actually see it also in my chat. So I want to focus in on that word cost. We talked about how, using Logitech as the example, supplier diversity managers are focusing the conversation around decision making, around information. It- Are you getting an indication that the focus of performance measurement, the focus of what's driving these decisions is still anchored around cost? Is that conversation still happening? Or has it reached the point where, yes, cost is always going to be part of the conversation when procurement is involved, but there are much larger things and it's no longer maybe a roadblock that's being focused as something to overcome, but simply part of a larger discussion?
Yeah, we heard this loud and clear in the survey as well this year. I mean, the economy is the economy, and supplier
Yeah.
diversity is a critical business function like sales and marketing. And when the economy is tough, those departments get their budgets cut, as does procurement. So no, we're not seeing it beyond that. It really is a standard operating procedure. And in fact, the economy and that was the bigger impact for programs. It wasn't politics. It wasn't any of that stuff. It was just the
Mhm.
basics of running the economy. The good news is small local suppliers, diverse suppliers, actually help reduce cost and increase supply chain competitiveness. So in a number of cases, we're seeing that it actually does help on the cost equation as well as all the other benefits that we've talked about.
Now, this report, so it's been 7 years, and some things you hold consistent, but there are also things that you watch the market, you listen to conversations being had, and you add them. So, Laura, I was really interested to see one of the new metrics that appeared in this year's report. It really stands out once you see the report because it's about the only thing where there's not 6 years of data
Right.
preceding it. But this idea about winning new business as a metric to be tracked. Can you talk a little bit about what that metric captures in terms of business activity and why you made the decision to add it to this year's report?
Of course, yeah. So yeah, it's very interesting, and we're really looking forward to not only tracking this now but moving forward. But as we've seen often, right? Supplier diversity programs are enhancing competition, they're enhancing brand, and so what we're hearing though from our customers lately is they're getting more and more requests and needing to support the business in terms of sales and RFPs. And so they're working closer and closer as they work with the business. They're also looking to ensure that they can help to support the sales efforts and the response to RFPs for companies. And so what we saw in the report is that almost half of all respondents are using supplier diversity to win new business and RFP responses. Many of them are looking to that, right, in order to increase scores, to increase, right, the impact that their program has, and really be able to display that throughout RFPs and working with their overall business organization. So it's really exciting, and we're looking forward to continue to track that as we move forward.
Yeah. And that idea about data being critical, certainly if procurement is going to start taking a more active role supporting the sales effort, top line impact has been on procurement's wish list forever. And so both it would be wonderful if this became an avenue to that, but also we know going in what those expectations are from an information standpoint. And I think that provides us with sort of a good transition into all of the data that has to underpin these supplier diversity programs. They have to face up to, oh, go ahead, Daniel.
No, I was going to say, Kelly, real quick on that.
Yeah.
I think the lesson for all of us, as you were indicating, like what can we do as procurement professionals? If you are not talking to your sales team, that's an opportunity. Historically, there was a question on an RFP response: do you support local communities, or do you have a supplier diversity program? And it was a checkbox. Well, now they're expecting you to give a number, and many of our clients report they're being asked to provide even certification data and proof that they are spending as much. And next year, the federal government is going to be looking at 15% of your spend to be going to small and diverse suppliers. That's a lot, right? And again, those numbers would expect to be proven and potentially evaluated and potentially audited. So it's not just about do you have a supplier diversity program? But the effectiveness of that program can be significant in winning these RFPs.
And so what's hanging on those numbers is critical. And for procurement, it probably ends up being sort of two rounds of confidence. On the one hand, anything internal is always a little bit safer, let's say, but there's still something on the line from a credibility standpoint, from an influence standpoint for procurement, being ready to share those numbers, being ready. Being ready to say with confidence that they will stand up to the scrutiny and the questions that you're naturally going to get. Daniel, when you think about the questions procurement's likely to face and the natural and necessary, I'll say, scrutiny that any internal data should have that we know will eventually end up being external, what are some of the topics procurement should be prepared to address, or questions about the data procurement should be prepared to answer first internally, and then certainly as that data, especially for publicly traded companies, is shared externally?
Yeah, Kelly, the good or the bad news is the level of scrutiny is about the same, internal and external, meaning the internal scrutiny is very high right now. If you think about it, procurement now has our seat at the table. You think about like that sales leader that had that seat at the table when he or she presented the numbers. It wasn't, I think this is the business that's going to close. It's this is what is contracted. This is what we've issued invoices for, et cetera. It was a known provable number. We in procurement around these supplier diversity numbers, as you pointed out, are being held to that same standard now. Because business decisions are based on these. Bonuses are based on these. RFPs are being won on these. Government contracts are being either won or lost or maintained on these. And so the big question a lot of times at high level is basically, how did you get these numbers and why should I trust them?
Yeah.
And if your answer is, well, Dan runs a report every week, that's, or hey, we got this when, we asked suppliers when they registered with us 2 years ago, those numbers are not going to hold up to scrutiny. This data is very volatile. Small and diverse suppliers come and go, certifications lapse. And so making sure that you have a credible answer on why this data is reliable and why it should be trusted is really, really important. Things that we saw in their report, for example, fewer organizations are now reporting on non-certified spend. So if you have a supplier that is self-certified, essentially, last year, 45% of the time we would include those numbers in reporting, or clients would include those numbers in reporting. This year, it's down to 40%. And last year, few of them were just tracking. Now even more are tracking, but not reporting. So 25% track those numbers, but do not report them publicly because they want to be able to have proof, right? They want to be able to show a certificate. We've been very fortunate, as Laura and I have been talking to the folks that filled out the survey, a number of supplier IO customers, their answer when asked, how did you get this data was we use supplier IO. And in many cases that's met the burden because they know of our, the size of the database, they know the rigor that we put in these numbers.
Now, one of the other things that I've always appreciated about the data is that on the one hand, you can say how much spent, right? That's certainly one level of metric, and it's one that a lot of supplier diversity programs and companies look at. But if we take sort of a supply chain mindset and you think about what would be a tier 2 metric, or what would be a tier 2 way to measure the success of the program, for a long time, you've looked at economic impact. So this is something that goes beyond how much money did we spend with certified diverse businesses to what sort of an effect is that spending having in the various communities that those businesses operate in. Laura, I think this is one of the most compelling ideas that comes from this whole supplier diversity movement, because it's what ultimately takes it down, not just to the community or human level, but sort of closes the loop on why companies started taking this approach in the first place. Can you talk a little bit about how economic impact is captured, what that actually looks like? And then I'll let you do that first, but I certainly also want to talk about some examples of where, though maybe tricky or an additional step of effort, it's being done today with great success. So when you talk about economic impact, what does that mean is being tracked? What are you gathering about that in the report?
Sure. So let's talk first about like what we saw from customers. So if you about a year ago, when we did the supplier diversity report, there were about 10% of people actually reporting economic impact. We saw a significant jump just in 1 year, and now we're seeing 37% of companies and supplier diversity leaders reporting on economic impact. And so this is just exciting. And for someone that is currently working in supplier diversity, the ability not to only report those spend numbers, but to really have impact and show the value of your program is very exciting. And so we're seeing a significant increase there. Essentially what we're measuring, right, is for every dollar spent, what that impact has in the community in terms of increase in jobs, tax actually revenue, income increases in wages for people living in those communities. So these are like real world human attributes that we're seeing the program measure. And, that is a huge ripple effect. And so what we see on average is that for about every dollar spent in your supplier diversity program, you're seeing about $2 impact in a community in the communities in which you impact. So it's significant. It's a big ripple effect. And so we're seeing more and more companies realize this and reporting on this. And so we have a number of public reports that you can take a look at to understand what's in those. But to give you an example, we've done one for CVS Health. We just published one for American Water, and we even do it for NMSDC. So these are very, comprehensive and analytical programs that use federal data, government data, and a number of different data sources to really make sure that we're capturing all the spend and showing that ripple effect and the value that your organization brings to that specific community or communities which you operate in globally.
And I will just
and
add
Kelly,
to
if
that.
I can.
Yes,
Oh,
of
sorry,
course, Daniel.
please. I was going to
gonna-
say we were talking before about RFPs and using the
Yeah.
data, using your data. So imagine your response to an RFP is, yes, we have a supplier diversity program. Well, better is, yes, we have a supplier diversity program and we spent X dollars or X percent of our procurement dollars. But imagine if your RFP response is, yes, we have a program, we spent such and such dollars. And by the way, we support over 1,000 jobs in the community that your business operates in. So like, for example, we talked to Susie Cabo, who runs the United Airlines program, and they use their data in RFP responses to large enterprises, but also in government affairs to support if you're working on capital projects, how do you get approval for those? To be able to show you have a positive impact on the economy, not just the construction workers you hire to build those factories or what have you, but the ancillary economy around it with your procurement spend, that can be incredibly powerful.
And I'll even add to that, Daniel. It's funny you talk about what are you really saying in your numbers? This, to me, the economic impact piece is a little bit like when we say, oh, well, how far is that distance? And you say, well, it's 10 football fields, right? Everybody knows a football field. Everyone knows the value of a job. And so it's taking what that company is spending and putting it into football fields or cross-Atlantic plane flights or something that we can relate to, so that that impact starts to be something that you can almost experience and then factor that back into your decision-making process. I will also say, and this actually speaks to a question that Tammy put into the chat, this is my own addition. I've looked through a number of these economic impact reports. The examples we've given here today, CVS Health, and I apologize, Daniel, was it United that you said?
United Airlines.
Thank you. I think the notable thing about a lot of the companies that are doing this is that they are large, recognizable, consumer-facing brands. So they are not necessarily doing this because it is the easiest thing to do. They are doing it because they know how important it is, and they're looking at their scope and their potential for impact economically in these communities. And they're saying, this is something that we want to capture. So I believe and just in answer to Tammy's question, Daniel, maybe I'll put this to you. Is there a place on the Supplier IO website where some of these economic impact reports are available? I know there's data about the general approach in the report, but if people are interested in seeing some of these economic impact reports to understand what's in them? Is there a good centralized place to go?
Yeah, if you look at the economic impact page, you'll see a couple samples right there.
Excellent. Now, certainly the other thing that we're hoping to track in all of these reports is growth. And seeing growth is wonderful, but just like we don't stop at spend and we push on to economic impact, we also want to understand how and where these supplier diversity programs are growing. Daniel, when we think about the forms of growth, we've talked about a lot of different metrics today. What do companies mean when they talk about how they're growing their supplier diversity program?
Yeah, there's a couple different areas where we heard people are looking to grow their programs. One is what we've explored so far is we're just working with their business unit counterparts. So identifying which BUs have the biggest opportunity for spend. So Dwayne at Enterprise Mobility, they refer to it as a heat map. So if you are in the California region, lots of opportunity to grow. So we expect higher numbers for you. So partnering with your business unit counterpart, looking at the environment of diverse suppliers that support those business communities and the business environment in those areas is one area we saw for growth. The second is geographic. We saw a lot. So in 2021, only about 6% of organizations were thinking about taking their supplier diversity programs beyond the US. This year, about 27%, almost a
Oh,
third,
wow.
plan to grow their programs geographically with a focus on Europe and Canada. As Laura and I were speaking to a number of them, a lot of them are thinking UK in particular is becoming quote unquote low hanging fruit. MSD UK is there now. We
Yes.
Connect a number. So the data in the UK is much higher quality, and is starting to rival what we have here in the US. So we're starting to see organizations feel comfortable to start expanding their programs there. And so those are probably the two biggest areas. The third area of growth is partnering with the ESG counterparts as well. We're seeing some opportunity there.
And given where we are in the year, I mean, Q4 is right there, just around the corner. So when you look at the growth that you've seen reported from last year to this year, and I know you also have one-on-one conversations with a lot of the companies that participate in the survey to get kind of the color around what are they seeing and where are they investing. Laura, are there any conclusions or general trends that we can draw from an outlook perspective? So,
Mhm.
whether it's rest of this year, whether it's extending through 2025, or whether it's even hopefully longer term planning than that, whether we're talking about supplier diversity specifically or the ESG movement as a whole, what would you say about the outlook, the general perspective on where these programs are going and how they are planning for and investing in the future?
Mhm. Sure. So we are seeing a significant trend in terms of many diversity leaders having to work with either a counterpart or themselves being responsible for sustainability. And there's so many things driving sustainability reporting today and ensuring that we're capturing things for regulatory purposes. So that's a big driver that we're seeing and a big trend that's supporting that. We're also seeing a significant, and that reporting actually is emissions as well as things like human rights. And we're also seeing a significant impact in terms of customers really looking to bring together how they are able to look at ESG all up, right? So how they're able to bring their diversity and their ESG programs together and ensure that they're reporting successfully across a number of different areas. So that's certainly a significant trend. And so that's going to continue, I imagine, to increase as regulatory pressure increases as well. In addition, we're seeing, like this year, the budgets were a little bit tight in terms of diversity, but we're really seeing, in fact, just to give you a data point on that, a third of our respondents saw challenges with budgets this year. But as we outlook into 2025, we're really seeing that loosening up a little bit. And we're hopeful that, we'll have much more of a turnaround. We're starting to see less budget impact on our programs. Again, we talked about economic impact and customers really looking to showing the value and therefore helping to support, right, those efforts and those budget increases. And so our recommendation and what we really recommend as you look at 2025 is to make sure you're connected with your sustainability partners if you are not at all doing it yourself, but also if you are, let's take a look at what the sustainability measurements are that you need to track. Make sure you're looking at that in addition to diversity, and certainly Supplier IO has expanded our efforts in order to help you with that. But really to shore up your data, make sure that you understand and have a good data, demonstrate more value with economic impact and with your business units, and really prepare for growth next year. Some of the things we just talked about today and how you can do that, again, partnering very heavily with your business unit in order to be able to find those areas for growth globally, to grow in that area as well. And so those are the trends that we're seeing in the outlook that we're seeing for 2025.
Well, I think the thing that ends up becoming key here, so we talked about the three separate themes today, right? Executive and line of business engagement, data, we talked about growth, but they really do all come together into a virtuous cycle. So you can see where, especially given your comments, Laura, about budget this year and hoping for a little bit of a loosening next year, all of the time and energy that went into first data, and then that face time, those engaged conversations, meaningful information to motivate decisions, whether it's at the executive level or at the budget holder decision maker level, that should feed into the conversations that are then happening around budget allocation and commitment and prioritization, and hopefully feeds into this situation where the growth that we've talked about is given the opportunity to happen simply because supplier diversity managers have done such an excellent job allocating their time and making sure that what they did on behalf of the business wasn't just good, but it was also recognized by the business. I think being able to put that information in front of them. Daniel, before we wrap, and as I remind people one last time, either click on Daniel's link to go take a look at the economic impact reports or download your copy of the State of Supplier Diversity report. Any perspective you have on that sort of same outlook topic, either through the end of the year or sort of the tone that we're looking to see going into and then through next?
No, I agree completely with Laura. The folks that we spoke with, what we saw in the survey data is people are very optimistic. There's a lot of FUD, if you will, out in the market, shall we say, around programs and the impacts they're having, and the professionals that we're working with, and what the data shows us loud and clear is their CEOs and their executives continue to support the programs. It is business as usual. Add value, and I love your comment, Kelly. Make sure people know, because I think that's the one thing we do see is a lot of folks are doing great work. It's that promotion of your work, making sure that you are not only highlighting the great work that you're doing, but also highlighting the business unit leaders that are supporting you and how they're also getting better business results because of your program. All of those are great ways that people, but now's a great time to be bold, or said differently, now don't be shy. Your programs are adding a lot of value. Clearly, the companies are supportive of those. Now is a great time to sort of look and prepare for that expansion as the economy starts to turn around and we start to see more stability. And procurement professionals, we get that recognition at that seat at the table, shall we say.
And whether it's seat at the table, whether it's top line impact, whether it's a new way to talk about the business outcomes and community impact associated with this discipline, I think there is a ton. We've only scratched the surface today in terms of what's in the report. So please do download that. Laura and Daniel, thank you both so much for being here, for sharing the stories, for doing the work. It is a Herculean effort associated with this report. So thank you to you and your whole team for putting in the effort here, and for answering my questions and the audience's questions as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who's either joined us live to participate in the conversation or who will no doubt be listening in later on. We appreciate you making time in your schedule for this sort of important conversation. Hopefully, we've given you a lot to think about, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.